Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and today we're doing a remote show, but we are carrying on what's become a pretty long tradition of having Luther Weeks from Connecticut Voters Count as our guest shortly after the election. And we will talk about the 2021 elections, about voting integrity in general, and about what's to come. So welcome, Luther.
Welcome.
And I guess the first thing, I imagine that a lot of people who are watching this show have seen you and heard you here before, but maybe briefly you want to talk a little bit about your background and how you got involved with being a champion of voting integrity.
Sure. So I was a computer scientist in life, and then I worked in industry. And I got involved in a campaign, in a presidential campaign in 2004, Howard Dean, and it blew up. And then there was this book called Black Box Voting, and I read it, and I could understand it, being a computer scientist, how easy it is to hack elections and all that. I passed it on to my wife. She read it. She emailed it to a whole bunch of our friends, and before you know it, I got a call and said there's a hearing over at the state capitol tomorrow on election integrity and machine risks and all that other stuff. And I worked 2 miles away. So I went there and listened to all the experts. And then I went and testified myself. And I said, I'm the expert from 2 miles away. And I'd never been in the LOB before. And the rest is history.
Yeah, you've been in the LOB a lot of times since then, I'm sure.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about CT Voters Count as an organization and what you do?
Well, I have two organizations. CT Voters Count is where really it's as much as a blog and an archive of everything to do with elections that people in Connecticut might want to know from outside of Connecticut, and everything inside of Connecticut that we all want to remember and keep track of, and my opinions and that kind of stuff. And then there's Connecticut Citizen Election Audit, and that's a different group. And there we have a board of directors, and what we do is we organize citizens to observe our post-election audits. And then we make independent reports on those audits to tell the public, how much they can trust those audits and trust our voting machines in the election process. So, last year we took a year off. We observed some of the board members observed a few of the audits. But we didn't ask our members to and want to put any of them at any kind of risk. And so we didn't ask them to observe. But this year, and we're back observing again, and we need more observers all around Connecticut. ctelectionaudit.org. And there's a thing there where you can sign up. And you say, oh, these are the dates that I'm available during the audit period, which starts exactly 2 weeks after the election. These are the dates that I could be available, and this is the distance I'm willing to travel. If you want to actually observe one, which I'd encourage everybody to do anyway, 35 miles in at least 3 dates during the week. If you really want to be sure, give me a lot more than 3 dates, or say 50 miles, but if you're seriously willing to go 50 miles in one direction to observe an audit, it'll take you, half a day, maybe a little longer, because these may be pretty big, because, it depends on which town. If you go to New London, maybe not so big. If you come to Glastonbury, we had 44% turnout, and we have, about 2,000 voters in every one of our districts. So doing a district can take a little time. There's going to be 2 innovations this year you might be interested in, right?
Yeah, in fact, I was really interested in hearing because we took the year off last year. Maybe you didn't, but I took the year off
Okay,
last
well,
year.
I didn't,
But
but you know, we had our volunteers, and you know, so we don't seem to. A lot of our longtime volunteers don't seem to be signing up yet. So there's a lot of room. There's always a lot of room for more volunteers. You'll learn about our elections a lot. We got video training, all that. And if you tell us a date and it comes to it and you can't do that date, we understand. So two innovations this year. First, we've been working for years to improve our audit law. And we got one, there's 10 things we could improve, but we got one big improvement. And that was that now central count absentee ballots are included in the audit, which of course is even more important than it was before. Now we have the no excuse absentee balloting. So, we're going to be auditing some of the central count AB operations.
Now, will that include the EDR or just the absentee?
No, not the EDR. So there's two major things not included still, which should be. And one is the EDR, and the other is the originally hand counted ballots. Okay, so ballots for whatever reason that couldn't be read through the machine that had to be hand counted originally are included in the audit, because under the theory that people don't make errors in counting ballots and only machines do. Of course, when the Secretary of State's office sends the data from the audit to UConn, which is supposed to make a report on it, then suddenly if the hand count doesn't match the machine count, then all of a sudden, the problem is machines count more accurate than people do. So all these errors that they found are not real errors. It's bad hand counting. But after 8 p.m. on election night, after a 16-hour day, somehow officials there are supposed to be able to count accurately.
Wow. So I guess we'll talk more about like the details of the audit. I've done it in the past, and I admit.
And we do have one other innovation this year too.
Okay. Oh yeah. Well, why don't you talk about the new innovation? And then
the other innovation is that there was a task force created by the legislature to plan. It's called a working group, which is somewhat of a misnomer. That is going to do a pilot risk limiting audit in Connecticut. And instead of looking at all the risk limiting audits that have been conducted and building on the shoulders of giants or whatever you want, they're kind of doing it, they're trying it their own way in Connecticut. And but it'll be very interesting. We're going to try and observe it. I'm going to get some observers from out of state that have a lot of experience in risk limiting audits, so they can look at it and evaluate.
And I wanted to ask you a little more about that after a little later on, because when I went to your website, I saw many references to risk limited audits and did not really know what it is. And
Sure.
So it's something new that I'm interested in. I wanted to ask, were there, thinking about just the elections that we just had a few days ago, is there anything that stands out? Were there any obvious problems in any towns or any local highlights or trends or anything that you saw just on election day? As I know that there was one year in Bridgeport, like there was a real disaster. There have been, funny things every so often, even in Connecticut.
Well, I'd call it kind of a normal local election. We have a very high profile recanvass in, what's that town? West Haven. And in fact, the media interviewed me on that. As usual, I got some calls from disappointed people that thought there were problems in their town. And I'm always I never disclose who it is and that stuff unless I have permission.
Right.
And some people had what might be a reasonable case that they gave me, and I gave them my advice of how they might go about it. But somebody said when we got the paper ballots and all that. It was obviously a registrar said something like, we got the paper now, so if there's any question, we can always recount the paper. No, it depends on who has that question.
True.
Okay. If you or I have it, we can't always count the paper. Faculty probably won't. But if a registrar wants it, or a party chair convinces a registrar or something like that, then you might get that kind of count. But we can't always count the paper. That's a problem.
That does sound like it could be a problem. And it's certainly better, though, than touch screens that have no paper.
Oh, and the touch screens with paper are called BMDs, ballot marking devices. That is just as bad. It just gives you an illusion of accuracy.
The ballot marking.
That sometime we could.
I was going to say that I make a point of observing when our local registrars test the tabulators, and 1 year, and this year it wasn't a problem with the vote totals, but some of the they use ballot marking machine ballots, ballots. They don't mark the ballots.
Right. And I'll tell you how to criticize that. Well, my criticism might be a little different than what yours is. Go ahead.
Okay. So what happened was that some of them, the printer had some ghosting marks on the ballot, and some of the totals on all the tabulators were the same, but for one candidate who was on both the Democratic line and the Working Families line, some of the tabulators saw it as a Democratic vote, and some saw it as an unknown party vote. That the tabulators were not consistent on whether they picked up this ghosting that was apparently in the square that he was on the Working Families line.
Yeah. So I'd say that's a knock on the AVS system. It isn't a knock on the voting machine.
Right. It isn't.
It's not on the way it's taught to count them, and there's a little variation in there. My criticism of that is, that's a canned set of tests inside that AVS system. All that proves is that it hits the bubbles, because it doesn't test the AVS system. To test the AVS system, you can do that for a sight impaired person. They use a headset and push button phone or a keypad, whatever, to vote. And other people maybe they can't fill in a ballot. They kind of, can push a touch screen and vote. The fallacy is that the system works if those things print out right. Those things are some kind of a canned test. What you want to test the AVS is somebody to do a few ballots with the headset, and then somebody to do a few ballots with the touch screen, and that would prove the AVS is working right. Okay, so I think it's a reasonable way to test the regular scanners to do that. Because you're really not testing, what you're really testing is they program it right. Did they have, a contest candidate switched or something, the yes and no on a proposition switch? By the way, that's happened, not in Connecticut, but that I know of.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yep. So, so that's, otherwise that would be a good test.
Now you, on your website, I did see a lot about the ballot marking devices issue. Do you want to talk about that? I
sure.
feel as though
the idea, an AVS is a kind of a ballot marking device, but that's what they use in Georgia and other places.
Pennsylvania, maybe.
Huh?
Pennsylvania, maybe.
Yeah, part of Pennsylvania at least. And they recently, in the last 2 years, they replaced paperless DREs with these ballot marking devices, which, by the way, cost about double of what we have. And they cause more lines because you got to have one of these machines for each person that's voting at one time. And, whether it takes it may take a little longer to vote too with that, that's not a big problem, except you need more machines, and there's more machines to program each election and blah, blah, blah. But, it makes a lot more money for the vendors, which wine and dine election officials. And they're under suit. They're in a federal suit to back out that they made the wrong decision and all that. And it's probably going to succeed. But the problem with those is, so there's a lot of problems, but the main problem is you get like a supermarket receipt which says who you voted for. It doesn't say who you didn't vote for. It doesn't say what races you didn't vote for, that kind of thing. And then the idea is you're supposed to look at that and then, see if it's right. And if it isn't, you can, redo it. But then you take it over and you throw it into a scanner. Well, the problem is that, they've done tests on, and, these are kind of setup jobs, but they do these tests where they alter a couple of votes from what the people are voting on it. And they see how many of them detect that. It's below 5%.
Whoa.
They've done this on real voters in an election, with cameras and stuff, or people standing, observers. Unlike Connecticut, other states will have observers in a polling place. But they look at how many people look at their ballot and how long they look at it. Okay. And the bottom line in that is almost nobody checks their ballot. So you might have voted for, let's say, Joe Biden. And you might look at it and, that's all you see. Oh, I voted for Joe Biden. Great. Or maybe Joe Courtney or something as well. But below that, they don't have time to check. Well, let me come. So, so you want to steal an election by 5%. Great. You alter 6% of them. And at least 5 of them will get through, 5%. And another one, most of the voters are going to, I must have pushed the wrong button, and go back and redo it. Or if they go to the election officials say, just go back and revote it. Oh, the machine changed my vote. Well, I'll tell you, even when I'm an election official, I don't believe that. Because people tell me all the time that, oh, the counter didn't go up on our scanners. Well, the counter did go up. I can guarantee you, maybe in the history of Connecticut, it might not have gone up once or twice. But, usually you got 1 or 2 voters a day in the polling place saying it didn't go up, but you count the ballots at the end and it matches what the scanner said and the number of ballots. So it's the same thing with that. And I don't blame the election official, but the problem is nobody's going to detect it. They're not going to in big numbers, and nobody's going to believe them. Most voters won't believe themselves. So it's not verifiable. That thing that goes into the scanner is not verifiable. There's other small problems with it, but that's the other ones are too technical to describe here and not quite as important, in my opinion.
Well, talking about what you just mentioned, I think about next year's 2022 race in Connecticut.
Yeah.
And all these statewide offices will be on the ballot. There will be a lot of races for people to vote in, governor, Secretary of State, Attorney General, Treasurer, Controller, U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, Registrar of Voters. So by the time people, I can just see people noticing who they voted for governor, but all the down ballot races, right, they are not going to go through.
You would have to look at it for a period of time to do that. Some people go into the polling place with a list of who they want to vote for. So that's really easy for them to compare it if they take the time. But then nobody's going to believe them. They might not even believe themselves. And we're going to probably have two interesting, maybe one interesting, probably an interesting primary next year for Secretary of State. Mm. And then, the governor's race would probably be very interesting again. I'm not sure the rest of them, it depends on you know, which incumbents are, you know, running for election and which ones are stepping down.
Yeah, the Secretary of State election with Denise Merrill stepping down
Right.
is shaping up to be pretty interesting. And well, of course, you're a voting guy, and I kind of am, you know, I think it's a pretty significant election.
Yeah.
So, you know, what are you seeing? Are there people who have put their hat in the ring?
Yeah, there's, I think it's, my numbers are right. It's 6 Democrats so far and 2 Republicans. And I offer to talk to all the candidates. I guarantee I will not, you know, I could change this in the future sometime, but not between now and 2022. I guarantee them I'm not going to endorse a candidate. Okay. I try and give them advice.
Yeah.
You know, and about what I see the state of the election is, and all right, already. One candidate has contacted me so far, and we've had a long discussion, a very productive discussion. And but I'm not actually pursuing the rest of the candidates right now because it's going to sort out. I mean, for all I know, we're going to have 4 or 5 more candidates, and then all of a sudden, you know, next spring we're going to be down to, you know, maybe 2 or 3 Democrats and, you know, two Republicans or whatever, you know, because that's what happens. But you know, we'll see. The problem in the state of Connecticut is there's kind of 2 requirements for Secretary of State. One is, you know, free. One is, you know, a lot about elections, the mechanics of elections. And number 2, you're pretty good at running a, you know, reasonable size bureaucracy with a position of where you got to make a lot of important decisions. And the third one, though, you've got to be politically known statewide, so you're going to win. Okay.
Yeah.
And there's nobody that, you know, in general that meets those requirements, because candidates that are known and well known, good or not so good people, it's wrong for that. They can't be allowed in polling place when they're running for election. So in general, they don't know, you know, the mechanics. Then you got a few registrars of voters and some town clerks that probably know the mechanics of voting and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, they're not well known statewide. And a few of them might be, you know, very competent in that. Other states have it differently because they have a system that causes people with knowledge to be created. Okay. And Connecticut really doesn't have that. So I think it's very key that these guys pick good people for the Deputy Secretary of State and someone to be manage elections.
Now,
Okay.
is it typical at all for the candidates to, like once the field, you know, dwindles down to just the people who will be on the ballot, do the candidates ever say, this person I anticipate to be my deputy, or is that something we don't know about?
I don't think they usually do that. Yeah. Remember, they're trying to get people to endorse them. So all the people that might want to be deputy, they don't want to, you know, you're picking one. And this is true of it's like vice president and stuff like that. In fact, if they pick a good deputy, it probably might not be somebody you know.
That's,
you know, I mean, the qualities of a deputy is, you know, might be a lot different than you know, an internal manager and deputy. It's like a town manager. You don't really need a politician as a town manager. You want somebody that knows how to get the roads shoveled and, you know, staff the place.
yeah, and that is kind of a quirk in Connecticut elections, that the only statewide office that has official qualifications is Attorney General. You know, it has to be an attorney. You know,
well, that's because there's a lot of lawyers in the legislature, so they understand to be attorney generals, you need to know something about the law. But they don't have, I mean, the treasurer doesn't have to be an accountant. He doesn't have to run a calculator. And you can argue, well, he doesn't really have to do that, or she doesn't have to do it. Well, wait a minute. You want the treasurer to know something about finance. I mean, we happen to have one, and most of the candidates are. But, the Secretary of State almost needs to be a lawyer as well as knowing a lot about the election system. But, it's like one of my registrar friends says, we're expecting these registrars to be able to wear 6 hats. They got to be, be able to recruit people to work for them. They got to organize them. They got to be a security expert. They, I mean, all these things. Hey, you can't find any single person with that expertise.
That's true. That's true. And I deal with registrars locally quite a bit, and they've always been well-meaning and helpful. But, I look at the voter list for the city and think, this list isn't well maintained. Like every year I'll get a list of, people who are actively registered with the Green Party. And it's like, I'll give the registrars a list of the people that I know have moved out of state so that they can start the process to take them off our local voter rolls. And it usually takes years.
Well, that's the enemy is us. It isn't registrars in that case.
Right.
Okay.
That is true.
It's the laws. It's that we don't have an ID for each person. There's pluses and minuses on that. It's the archaic rules around privacy and not tracking people. The irony in this day and age is everybody can track people but the government, or the government could if
Right.
go to Facebook or something. And the irony is we can't use it for good. I used to be on the other side of that, 40 years ago. But I mean, it's like everybody but the government, the banks, the Facebook, the parties, they can figure all this out. And, but the government can't because of, the archaic things that just don't make any sense anymore.
Yeah,
you don't have much privacy.
There's a lot of weird dynamics. Now I think about our healthcare system, and I know this is off topic, but like the insurance companies will know everything, but you might not know be able to find out something about your next of kin.
Right. Yeah. It's.
Yeah, there are strict privacy laws, but they don't apply to the insurance company.
Yeah, it's like I said earlier, it depends on who asks the question.
Yeah. So before we totally leave the subject of the elections that just took place a couple of days ago, there was a tremendous range in voter turnout this year, greater than I think I've ever seen before. I heard that Hartford had something like a 5% turnout, and Guilford had turnout of more than 60%. Yeah. So what drives voter turnout?
A need, a reason to vote. Okay. Now, I don't know all the details in Harvard, but it was a Board of Education election. That's all they had. And, I just don't know the politics in this particular one.
Yeah, I know only a little.
There's a notorious election in Hartford that they keep bringing out that only 5% went out. This was, 8 years ago, 6 years ago. And there were 2 questions on the ballot, and it was a Board of Education vote. And I was on a panel. I've taken one side on one of the questions. Both questions were not understandable to any human being that wasn't really into these things. And, I said something about complaining about not enough people voting and stuff. And some lady got up and said, look, I work hard and I got this job and I got to do all of, my life. She said, I don't understand any of these questions. And you realize that the Board of Education election isn't contested.
Yeah.
I have no way that I could possibly think of to suggest that woman, it was worth her time to go and vote. Really, why should she trust me on that question? Why should she trust the officials on that question either? So I'm just saying, people always say low turnout here, low turnout there. Well, they got to have a reason to vote. Well, the people in Guilford and the people in Glastonbury, where I live, had a reason to vote. Okay. What I'm surprised about, I think this turnout in Stamford was very low. and they should have had a reason to vote.
You think?
Yeah, or either that, or they didn't really care who was mayor. I don't, maybe that's what they wanted. They didn't care, but that's what drives turnout. Okay, and that's,
Yeah.
Yeah. In my town, I'll say this too. In Glastonbury, we're very lucky that we have a weekly newspaper. And the newspaper prints and takes every letter of the editor that they receive, and they provide a really good coverage of the election and the candidates. And, there's studies that say the reason young people vote because they have no information about the election. So, no excuse absentee, early voting, whatever. People find a way to vote that are motivated. I mean, that's what people say. So, I'm in favor of making it reasonably convenient. But, if people are motivated to vote, then they're going to find a way to vote. I mean, if you're in prison and there's a way to get out of that prison, some of those prisons are going to find it. If you got a bank vault, if there's a way to get into that bank vault, somebody's going to find it. Or if a way to get money out of it, some employee is going to find it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this year also, we thought about trying to run a Green Party candidate for Board of Ed in Hartford. And one of the other dynamics, I don't know if it was contested or not contested this year, but the school board is majority appointed by the mayor. So whoever is elected is kind of isn't in
Minority.
a position of, is not in a position of real power compared to the appointed members of the board who presumably would be supporting whatever the mayor's agenda is. And so when we tried to recruit people in Hartford to run for the board, they didn't think there was much of a point. They wouldn't even be able to get seconds on things, motions they wanted to bring up.
And I know in my town, I mean, it's not like it's all elected in my town, but they have much more work to do. It's harder on them than the town council. It's a much bigger job. And all of a sudden this year became thankless, but fortunately we got people willing to run.
Thank goodness. And I'm guessing your results in Glastonbury were okay. I followed the Guilford race more than the Glastonbury one. And it seems as though there were a huge number of people who were kind of scared into voting because they just didn't want the craziness to take over their schools.
Yeah, well, I'm, of course, since my party did well in Glastonbury, I say everything was perfect, but I'm sure there's many people, there were many people that voted to the other side. It's reasonably close here all the time, and they may not feel that way.
Yeah. Well, in Guilford, I guess there were kind of three sides because there were the Democrats and the Republicans who were the very ideological Trump kinds of Republicans. And then on the independent party line, there were Republicans, some of them incumbents, who were very reasonable old New England kind of Republicans who functioned well in a multi-party board in the past, and they defeated the crazy Republicans. So I would say that was a win.
Yeah. Well, this is, I think I've talked about the zigzag hypothesis with you before. And that's where a portion of voters say, well, I want to mix it up. I don't want to vote party line. And they tend to, on a town council, go like that. So, I picked a Democrat here, I'll pick a Republican over here, and a Democrat here, so what happens is if I get a very popular candidate, the candidate above them or below them doesn't do well. I think a different thing happened here. So we had one former, someone running a petitioning candidate that used to be a member of a party that quit it. And he was the most popular politician in the last few years in our town, vote getter and all that stuff. So what happened is you had three people in that first line. And, I mean, this is probably, we were surprised, but, he got a lot lower votes than anybody else. But if you look at what happened, the other two people on that same column didn't do that well. The lowest vote getter in one party, and the other person was an incumbent that lost re-election. And then I noticed, then there were two more columns, and I think people could only vote for six, and I think they started to run out of their six by the time they got to the third column. Some of them. So the people farther to the right were not getting, so many votes. And it's because they were relatively popular people in that second and third column, as well as what went on in the first column. So it's very interesting. I'm glad we have a random assignment of, place on the ballot. I don't think it's that important. The Democrats have line A for now, and Republicans have line B. I don't think that makes as much of a difference, but just the people wanted to mix it up.
Well, I think, as I've often railed against our Connecticut ballot because I don't think it's a good thing that your position on the ballot really can affect your vote count. And there are other ballots where candidates are just listed, whether it's, clumping party members together or randomizing it, that would minimize that impact.
Yeah,
we had one Republican board member a few years ago, and she's a pretty good candidate, but she ran again and she's run a couple times since and gotten a good vote count, but not getting in. And the one year she did get in, the Democrat on the line above her had dropped out. So there was no one above her. So people went, this.
Exactly.
That's what you were saying. They zigged down to her. And it wasn't everyone, of course, but it was enough to give her the extra 100 or 200 votes she needed to squeak in. And so I think another problem is that for some races, everyone in the same column is running as head-to-head race, for the governor. Everyone in the same column, you choose one, it's all head-to-head.
Right, and
but
people get this idea, I can only vote one per column,
Yeah, so you get the at-large races, it's not true, but people still have that mentality. Yeah. So, ballot design is something that I think that I'd really like to see Connecticut look at. Sure.
Absolutely. But I'd love to have us look at it. There's people that spend their lives figuring out how to make better ballots, and what they do is they test them on people and interview those people like a focus group. It's happened to me. It's very interesting what can be done.
It is interesting. Okay, back to the audit. I know things were very different last year. What is the Connecticut audit going to look like this year? Is it going to go back to what it was like, 2, 3, 4 years ago?
Well, the audit has been evolving, but the audit didn't change last year. Our observation changed. Mm-hmm. We weren't able to quite go to enough of them that we felt we could write a report, on them. But one of the big things that's changed in the last few years is half of them are done electronically in Hartford. And all things considered, that's actually better than the way we hand count them. And what they do is they run them through a separate scanner that UConn has built. So it has no relationship to the other scanners. And through some encouragement from myself, they've gotten to the point where they randomly select ballots after they've counted a district, and they compare those ballots to how that machine counted. Okay. And I think that's going to be part of what they're going to do with risk limiting audits. Okay. And but I think they aren't quite there where it's a scientifically completely sound. But on the other hand, I don't necessarily stand here and say you got to have perfection and everything. I just want to improve the worst problems. and then we can worry about, refinement. So that, to me, and it's very good on registrars, because they just send 2 registrars in, they bring the ballots in, and they may feed them in the machine, but they don't have to do all this hand counting and all these other things, and it's much easier. I'm surprised they aren't demanding, the registrars, that everybody be allowed to do this, because they usually set up like a week, and they say, well, the first X many that respond. And then some registrars have never done that. And I think once they've done it, that's the way I want to do it. But so over time, we've had a few less audits in towns and a lot more. And by the way, centrally is a lot easier on us, because we can send a couple people and we can cover like 10 audits in a day. Whereas having to send, 1 person to each of 10 audits is, takes more people, and it's different. They don't do that. They don't tend to do that in primaries. And primaries are relatively easy to audit because you have a lot less ballots, and you have a lot less. You only audit 1 race rather than 3. The advantage of the electronic system is it actually audits every race on the ballot.
Oh,
So that's that's much nicer. Much more comforting.
now for people who volunteered this year, does that mean you are looking for more volunteers who are willing to drive to Hartford, or do you anticipate there will still be plenty of on-site
they're all around.
locations
The
that
audits
need
are
it?
all around the state. It's just we got a few less of them around the state, especially if you look at Stanford, Greenwich, down that area. It's a little farther for them to come to Hartford, so they don't. And so the ones that are farther away, maybe some of them that are smaller, smaller amount of ballots and stuff, so it's not as difficult to do. Like New Haven, sometimes, and there's so few ballots that it's not, it's probably not worth your time to.
Yeah, because each ward
they have
is
a lot
so
of, they have a lot of districts. I mean, they have a lot of
Yeah.
districts. And Hartford, even Hartford itself, the city of Hartford, they have quite a few districts and very low. Why in a 5% election, with 25 districts would they bother? Because maybe they got 50 ballots, or 2 districts with 50 each. That's so they're all over the place for different reasons. And all we need, we'll hopefully have a couple people in Hartford. Last year, I covered some of those myself, and 1 person wasn't covered because it's a 4-ring circus. So I'd rather have a couple people, but we have some people that would probably be able to do those, but it's instructive. So I encourage everybody to do this. There's all these people complaining about election integrity. We're all complaining about it. Well, it's do something about that itch that says I think there's something wrong here. This is a way you can see what actually happens. You can understand things better. And, the other way to do that is be a poll worker. But a poll worker, you got to go to training, and then you got to work a 17-hour day on election day. I absolutely recommend it to everyone. But this, you can do some video training for a couple hour and a half, maybe. And then you can come and do it in, maybe 6 hours, maybe 8 hours, sometimes 2 hours. That's not a 17-hour day. But, it's where you can learn. And that's what to do if you got this itch that says, did my ballot count right? Did it count? This is a way to get in and understand that on the ground floor rather than wondering, it's just makes sense. But compared to the number of people who complain and think elections are stolen and all that, and I'm not saying they aren't occasionally. Okay, I'm not saying they aren't occasionally. But this is your opportunity, and
It's really
we don't charge you for it.
Right.
Okay, and if you want to be a poll worker, you don't get charged either, but you actually get paid.
Right.
And that's the law.
sometimes if places are really nice, you get coffee and donuts or something. I do recommend also that people do it. I've done it for many years. I haven't had a chance to look in my calendar yet, but I hope to this year as well. It's really interesting to meet registrars and other civic leaders in other towns as well, because, you don't observe in your own town. And, this is New England. So every town has a little different feel to it. And it's kind of it's really interesting to see, what the dynamics are in each town. You never know what to expect. As you mentioned, Luther, sometimes I observed one audit, and it was one small borough, I think, in Old Saybrook, that was like 200 ballots, and it took an hour. It was like one race, but then I was in another town, and it wasn't that big a town. So I thought, oh, this won't be bad. But it was a town that only had one district. So there were about 6,000 ballots. And let me tell you, it wasn't a 17-hour day, but I was driving home in the dark.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is, if you're a registrar, if you have one polling place, both registrars can be there and supervise. And everything is easy. Once you get two, you get for a while, it was illegal for registrars to go into a polling place if they they had more than one, because they were supposed to be in the office managing stuff. So it becomes an issue of, creating more people centrally, and more people in each polling place that are well trained, and you got to set up it's real. So there are some like middle-sized towns that grew in the last 40 years. And, that's 6,000, and there's one that's 8,000 and something a few years ago. It's a really big bullet to say, well, I want to have two. And 6,000 or 8,000, you shouldn't have two. You should have a lot more than that. My town has 6 polling places and, 4,000 something registered voters each. But, we had 2,000 voters in each one this week. But in a presidential, we're hitting 3,500. That's a lot of parking.
Yeah.
Our limit is not in Connecticut, is not that we don't have lines except at 6 a.m. and when you go to election day registration. But at polling places, we generally don't have lines because we have the optical scanners.
Right.
Okay. But you can have a big parking met. You can't find a place that you can do 6,000 voters and have them park.
Wow. Now, I had a couple other questions that were sort of off the subject a little. But when I was observing the testing of the tabulators this year, the registrars were mentioning that the tabulators that we are using now, which were purchased for maybe the 2007 election, they're getting old, and it's hard to get replacement parts, and it's hard. And the state will be looking at new tabulators at some point. What are your thoughts on what the state should be looking at as we, upgrade our system?
Yeah. First, let's separate myth from reality. Okay. And one of the advantages of our observing the audits is we quiz the registrars every time we do an audit. And we ask them if they have any problem with the machines. So 3 or 4 years ago, we started to see the problems creeping up. But then problems are back to almost zero. And what we got is about the same level we had in 2007 when we first used them, except the memory cards have been all replaced with a better memory card. We used to have lots of memory cards we don't have. So as far as I can tell, and anybody else, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we had a maintenance problem, that they weren't being well maintained by the registrar or a vendor, And as far as I can tell, they are well maintained now. On the open market, used ones you can buy them from $10 to $100. Secretary of State bought a whole bunch of them. I mean, and they're better quality, less used is whatever you buy them for, maybe 1,000 she got them. The Secretary of State got a whole bunch of them a few years ago, just in case, she needed them, or, for this benefit. One registrar bought a whole bunch of them and was offering them to other registrars. My take is that at some point we will have to replace them. At some point, but we're not there yet. Okay, reality says, no, we're not there yet.
So the sense of urgency just isn't there, or shouldn't be there.
Well, and I think we ought to be thinking about it. And, but in reality, the new machines that you can buy today are a bit better. But maybe a little better. Sometimes I say marginally better. They're a little better than that, but they're a little better. But this year in Washington, there's a thing called the Voluntary Voting Systems Guidelines that comes out from the Election Assistance Commission. They were just revised. In fact, I led a group that put in the largest set of comments and the most cross-endorsed comments on that draft before it was finalized. And those voting machines are going to be more than incrementally better than the ones that you can buy today. And it's going to take the voting machine companies, 2, 3, 4 years before they get them on the market. And you know what? We don't want to buy the first one. We want to have multiple companies selling these and meeting these guidelines. And we want to have a few other states try them out if possible and find any real bad problems, and then we want to evaluate them, just like Secretary Beisowitz did way back in 2006. She did an excellent job of evaluating systems and handling very public, very open way. She had people with disabilities trying them. I suggested we have a technical review board or focus group, and she did that. Also had voters look at it. You could walk in and test them yourself, and they'd give you a survey afterwards of what you thought of these different machines. Well, we need to do that kind of thing again over time. And let me say the one real problem with these machines is that they are slower. Their technology is different. I tend to think it's, they could be faster, but you know what? The slower they are, the more they sell. So when you get to your 6,000 polling place, okay, one of them is going to cut it. Two of them isn't going to cut it. I'm not sure if 3 or 4 are needed. So, by the way, somebody did a study. The cost of every voting machine, if you negotiate the normal price, is $5,700. Some states pay $10,000, some states pay $4,000.
Oh my God!
But the real price is $5,700. I mean, it's amazing. Some students did this. It was wild. So, wow. I'm just saying, I think when we bought ours, they're 11, the ones we got now. But for $5,700, you can get one. And if you got 500 voters in your polling place, I can almost guarantee you got no problem. But I don't, they got to test them. And the speed of these is dependent on how many bubbles you got. Okay. Our machines, the speed is a little bit dependent on how long the ballot is. Not whether it's two-sided, just how long it is. And it's not much difference. Okay. But these, it depends on how many bubbles you got. Because what they do is they scan the ballot and then they use software to interpret the scanned image. Okay. And that's what takes the time. So there's a lot of studies that need to be done. We have 2 per polling place now, one's a backup. Well, maybe my place, which is going to have close to 4,000 voters in it, maybe we'll need 3 plus a backup. Maybe we'll need 4 plus a backup. Depends on which kind we buy. It's got to be tested. I mean, Greenwich has these huge ballots because they have the RTM, representative town meeting.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, those ballots have a lot of bullets in them.
Well, I was thinking that also, with the way our ballots are with the cross-endorsed candidates that are on multiple times, that also must slow down the process.
More bullets. Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if there's a difference between how many are filled in versus how many there are.
Oh, yeah.
But it probably is dependent on both, at least dependent on both. But maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I suspect the machines could be a lot faster. How like your PC, they can put all sorts of high speed,
right,
multi-processor, this and that in your PC. But you know what? Is it in the interest of the voting system company to do that? So we got to test them. So there's a lot of issues. But all I'm saying is, there's a lot of argument to wait if we can, because it's probably going to be better. And we're still hoping for open source systems, but it's not going as well as people thought that would, because it's a lot more than software. It's this, how your scanner kicks your ballot back,
right,
if you overvote or something like that. That's it. A regular old scanner doesn't do that. So you can't just grab a scanner off the shelf and do that. The Yukon system uses a regular scanner, but it doesn't have to reject any ballots. It just reads what's there, interprets it. So that's one of the challenges out there. It's hardware. It isn't just software. For a good
interesting. Well, that's something to look, to watch over the next few years. I agree that the Connecticut, the land of steady habits, should not be the beta testers of the new scanning.
Yeah.
Technology.
On the other hand, we don't want to have to buy them in an emergency. I don't think but things don't degrade like that. Hardware doesn't degrade. All of a sudden, you're going to wake up in one of our elections, and all these scanners aren't going to work. They're just going to get a little worse, maybe. I just want to say one more story. So I told Denise Merrill I had two terrible nightmares. Okay. One is that she has a task force or something and picks a voting machine. And then about the time she steps down, there's this brand new Secretary of State that's got to implement the new voting machine, which they're starting ground zero on knowledge almost. The other nightmare is she leaves office, and then the next person immediately has to find a voting machine. So, do a picking process. So, I think it'd be better if we had a Secretary of State for a couple of years. And then that's the time they decided that maybe start looking at this anyway. So.
Yeah, so we have a couple of years, like midterm for the next Secretary of State. Yeah. We should be looking at it.
Yeah, and if we got a Secretary of State that does a good job, maybe towards the end of their first term, it'd be a good time to start looking at it, or beginning of their second term, whatever. I don't know, but it's a challenge. And it doesn't. Admit
I was a little bit disappointed that Denise Merrill said she didn't want to run for re-election, but it's her choice.
There was a question whether she was going to run last time. So she's been secretary for 12 years, and I don't know her reasoning, but
maybe it was just time.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up on about the hour mark, but I do want you to end up with telling people how to get involved, how to get more information, and especially related to participating in the audits, but also getting just your updates on voting.
Okay, well, go to ctelectionaudit.org. And there you'll find, I'm sure it's the top post or second post right now, you'll see information about this, and mainly a sign-up form. And you go on there, you pick your in-person training date. We just have a conference call where if the video training doesn't answer all your questions, you can ask them there. We have some experienced people there. And then you put down the dates that you're available. And to go and do an audit. And we try our very hardest that when it's your first time, we send an experienced person with you. Okay. And, a lot of times we won't even ask to have you go without that experienced person there, because what we found is it's like a lot of things in life. You get the training and then you still don't know, you feel uncomfortable. So you do it once. And then all of a sudden, by the end of that, you feel pretty comfortable. And then and you do the training again next time, next year. And it's, you get the training a lot better after having observed it a little bit and tried it, So that's what we do. So, and that should, I'm sure people get concerned about that. I know they do. Doing it alone the first time. No, that's not, doesn't work too well. So we try to assign you with somebody else. And, and usually we won't, if there's nobody else available, we won't assign you.
Yeah, and I will attest to the fact that it's a really useful experience. You learn a lot about the ballots. You learn a lot about the people in various towns and their dedication to elections. Most of them, the registrars and the moderators who take part in these things, are people who really are concerned about the integrity of voting. Although I must admit, it's funny that they're sometimes kind of nervous. And one of the hardest things as someone who's observed is that if there's an experienced person running the audit, they'll try to ask us questions and we can't answer them.
Right.
It's like,
and I'll say too, they're in their very best behavior.
Yeah. They're very gracious.
Because, I assume they think they want to look good.
Yeah. And one other reason to go is, so much of what they do is out of the public eye, that I do think it's good for them to know that their work is noticed and they're not just always toiling in obscurity. Yeah. That, there are a lot of us who actually have some awareness of the complexity of what they're doing and appreciate it, even though I must admit a couple of the practices I've seen over the years have made me sort of internally shake my head. But everyone, they've always been welcoming and very, allowing me to just, observe and kind of been appreciative of our being there.
Right. And a lot of our people, who've done this went on to become registrars of voters. One is a regional monitor. So they got so interested in this that they went on. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of them become election officials after this to, make a difference or to learn more. And then, become registrars to work on doing it right.
Well, thank you, Luther, to everyone watching. If you go to ctvoters.org, ctvoterscount.org for general information about and up-to-date observations about voting in Connecticut, and CT, what is this?
Election audit.
Oh, yeah, ctelectionaudit.org to sign up to and learn more about observing. And we'll see you next week. Next time, I think the show is going to kind of shift gears and start talking more to people from local organizations that are doing good things in New London area and Southeast Connecticut in general. And thank you, Luther. And I guess I'll see you next year.
Okay.
Okay.